What's up everybody, Coach Mills here, and in this video I'm going to be breaking down the top 5 meta strategies that are either in your games or in pro play, and then I'm going to tell you exactly what you can do to counter them. Whether it's a weapon that's dominant, a character, or whatever, you're going to learn exactly what you can do to dominate the meta and emerge victorious climbing the ranked ladder with ease. Now, speaking of climbing the ranked ladder with ease, our newly minted GameLeap website is the one-stop shop to improve your game at Valorant. We have in-depth character guides running you step-by-step from beginner all the way to advanced, with in-depth VOD reviews run by Radiant level players. We have in-depth mechanical guides, Game Sense Pro, whatever you need in order to climb, we got it at the GameLeap website, so do yourself a favor, go check it out in the links down below. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Kicking it off with the #1 thing that is dominating this meta right now, and that's undoubtedly the operator. Now, this is affecting everyone from rank to pro play and everywhere in between, with players like Wardell and TSM destroying the meta and becoming one of the best teams in all of NA. And even in just your ranked environment, I'm sure that operators can sometimes just feel oppressive to deal with. They can be incredibly overwhelming, where enemies build up a slight advantage by ops, and then it just feels like you can't do anything. You peek one angle, you die, you peek one angle, you die. Well, I'm gonna tell you exactly what you need to do in order to give yourself a shot at beating operators, and then you can steal the enemy's op and dominate them with their own weapon. Oh, the humility. Anyways, without further ado, let's break down all the things that you can do about the op. Now, the first technique that you absolutely have to master if you want to survive in an op-filled meta, and it's the jiggle peeking. And this is a pretty common, obvious tip, but it is incredibly important that you do it right, because there is a very small margin for error, and a lot of times it will be dependent on how good the op player that you're playing against. You can have a really lazy jiggle peek, where you whip out even with your gun, you jiggle peek a corner, sprint speed, and the enemy is so slow in reaction time, they see you, you run out of their LOS, they fire, and then you know they're there, you jiggle peek them out. But against better players, this is not gonna work. You need to be incredibly tight with your jiggle peeking. This means whipping out your knife. This means jiggling in a way that you don't even see them with your eyes, but instead your mini-map, because you have to do this extremely tight so that you don't get killed by the enemy. The idea is that you use the latency and the ping to actually make it to where the enemy have no window to kill you, not give them a really tiny opportunity to kill you. While this almost seems impossible based on reaction time and things like that, if you jiggle peek perfectly, unless the enemy is like a god tier like Wardell, they're not going to be able to kill you, and you're going to be able to get information about where they're playing. Now, another thing is, sometimes the best peaks are even a step above that, where you're really not even gathering information. The only thing that you're jiggling out is like your arm. And this is to bait out an enemy shot, but remember that not every enemy will shoot off that. Some enemies will either be able to not fire, or some enemies will just not react in time, and then they won't fire afterwards. So keep that in mind. But essentially what you're doing here is you're trying to gather information about where the operator player is playing, because that's the hardest part, right? Every time you're in your games, you have no idea where the operator player is. He could be anywhere, and you feel like you can't peek any angle without dying, so you jiggle peek angles first, try to figure out where the operator is playing, and then you kind of get a better idea of game plans from there. And I'm going to talk about some game plans, what you can do after you find out where the operator player is. Now, if you're rocking an operator yourself, you can challenge operator players on attack. Now, remember that operators on defense have an inherent advantage because all they have to do is hold the angle. But if you incorporate styles like jump peeking and you pre-aim the proper angle where enemies are holding, you can shut down an enemy. This could be done even better if one of your allies jiggle peeks an enemy, you know they're there. After they fire, you jump peek them and shut them down just like that. Another way, of course, is to flush them away with smokes, but the big problem with using smokes to flush away operator players all the time is you have to actually do something once they leave. You can't just flush them away and that's the end of it, because if you flush them away, they're gonna back up to an alternate angle, and then you get to that angle and you flush them away again and they're gonna back up to an alternate angle, and eventually you're gonna run out of smokes, and all you're doing is forcing this operator to reposition. You have to make concrete steps onto point control, or else none of these smokes are gonna be valuable or useful at all. it is incredibly important that you convert this smoke resource into actual point control and not just, I'm gonna smoke them off, I'm gonna cross through, then I'm gonna back off. And if you do this too much, you're gonna end up with no smokes, with an operator that's holding a long angle, and you have nothing to do about it because you wasted all these smokes without any substantial amount of point presence or space taken. Now, the next thing you can do if you have an op player, what you could do is actually have your op post up after you control the angle with the flash. So let's say there's an angle like A long on Haven, and you know that an operator player plays there. You flash out on Phoenix, force that person to at least back off for a second, and then you jiggle in your op to hold the angle. Now, this is good for a number of reasons. One, you now have this very powerful angle that you can hold for a substantial amount of time, either while your team pushes up short, or you can hold this angle while your team pushes off long, whatever the case may be. And the second thing is, a lot of times enemies are gonna re-peek that angle after the flash because of how far you are away. They can jiggle out and jiggle back in. They will re-peek, but by that time, your operator player already controls the angle. They can shut down the enemy op, and then you get a free pick, you get the free space, you get to push up, and they didn't get any value out of their op. They wasted all that money for nothing, and you can laugh at them, type to them in the comments, make fun of them. I'm just kidding, but you get the picture. Now, another key aspect of this is realize that some parts of maps are worse for ops and some are better. Trying to challenge long sightlines, for instance, even if you have long range weapons, something like an AR, Vandals, or whatever, it is a lot harder to trade out with that kill than it is if you're challenging a close angle that operator players are holding. If you are really struggling pushing C long up against an op player, you do not have to challenge that angle as much or at all, and then you should go instead to challenge angles that are a lot more difficult for operator players to hold, and if they are holding these angles, it's a lot easier for you to trade out with them. Imagine on the Haven map, again, we're going to use this example again. If you push like long A or long C, these are a lot more difficult to trade out with an op that's playing on point, right? Or playing the really far angle because they're so far away. But imagine you're pushing garage. That's a little bit different. If you are rushing through garage and one of you gets opped, it's a lot easier for you to potentially kill that op player and maybe trade out with her. And at the very least, you get direct control over this space, and then you're in a close range space where the ops are less effective. So you need to be thinking about this. That's one of the best ways that you can counter the operator. Now, the next thing we got to talk about, the next meta defining things are characters, and there's 3 of them: Jett, Sage, and Cypher. And I'm going to give you a few tips to counter each one of these characters individually, why you should counter them, what you should do, and things like that. Now, the most important thing about these heroes is their abilities allow them to play in a way that can be absolutely oppressive, so it's your job to figure out how to deal with these abilities individually to make sure that you actually have a chance in a fair fight, because a lot of these abilities just do something overtly incredibly powerful. Now, the abilities in question we have to talk about are Cypher's traps, plus of course his camera, Sage's slows and barrier orb, and then Jett's tailwind. As far as exchange of resources, trap, slow, and wall only take time to remove and diligence, and Cypher's cam can be very difficult, but it is one of the most powerful abilities in the game because it provides a constant flow of information, so cutting that information off is very, very vital if you can. Now, against these traps and slow wall, you can slowly force these abilities out. You want to be clearing them and putting in effort to clear them, even if you don't plan to push that given site, because a lot of these abilities can be used later on to really set up an unfair engagement. For example, if you never push the B site and the enemy Cypher know his traps are still intact, they will never have to be afraid of you potentially of rotating there, so they can play in a way that doesn't accumulate any resources to that side of the map. Now, with abilities like Slow Orb and Wall, these abilities can really convert later on, especially Wall. If you don't bait that out early, it could be a nightmare. If you're playing long with a spike planted, for instance, they wall you off, you don't have line of sight, you have to break the ice wall, it could just be a disaster. And in order to bait these out, you have to be putting constant pressure on multiple sides of the map. This is one of the key differences of pro play versus rank play, and this is why actually split pushing across the entire map, playing in every single part of the map's default, is really, really important. You bait out these slows, you bait out these Cypher cages, these traps, whatever you have to, you put pressure on the enemy to where they have to invest these resources, and then you spend time on the clock, time in default, split, to bait out all these abilities, whittle them down. Otherwise, you just rush onto one site, and if those characters aren't specifically there, they will still have these abilities later on, and it gives them a strategic advantage. So that's one of the most important things that you need to think about. Don't be afraid to put 2 people pushing A, 2 people pushing B, 1 person lurking mid, or whatever. This is the way that you really bait out all these abilities, and you put a lot of pressure on these powerful Sentinel characters. Now, the next ability we gotta talk about is Jett's Tailwind, which might be the individual most powerful ability in the game, which might be controversial, but a lot of pros are going out and saying that because it allows value to be exchanged too easily. We talked about traps and slows and wall, but what are their actual value? Well, it can delay, it can cause a lot of stalling, maybe it can trade up for value or whatever. But Tailwind, especially in the hands of an expert opper or an expert rifler, that can directly change to a numbers advantage where you get a kill and get out. That's why it's one of the most powerful abilities in the game, especially at the pro level. So what you really need to be doing is you need to be expecting a Jett to play anywhere, and you need to be putting conscious effort into trading your abilities for a Jett's potential positioning. Now, the reason I say this is if you trade pretty much any ability, whether it's a flash, whether it's a molly, whatever the ability may be, if you trade that for a Jett's Tailwind, it is absolutely worth it. And then afterwards, whether it's Jett's Tailwind or any of these abilities that we're talking about, you need to be calling out when they are no longer present. It is incredibly important that everyone in the entire team, everyone on your team, knows what abilities are still in play, because it could fundamentally change how they take any duel or engagement. Whether or not they expect a Jett to be hiding in the cubby or not depends on whether or not she has Tailwind and any of these other abilities. It can greatly change how the games play out. Now, the next big strategy that we have to learn how to counter, and it's eco rush. And this happens sometimes in pro play, but even in your ranked games, this is where the enemy's on eco and they like 5-stack rush one site. And this could also be that they're on defense and they still rush out as a 5-stack. So how do you deal with this particular strategy? Because it can be really annoying if you're playing like a Sage and you're playing defense and all of a sudden 5 people rush you, they break your wall, they kill you, and you're like, what the heck, 5v1, how am I supposed to win that? Well, the biggest thing that you need to understand is the exchange of resources as far as weapons are concerned. A lot of times on eco, on the second round after your team won the first round, some number of you will upgrade your weapons, as you should, to ensure that you win the eco round. Now, if enemies can come and trade numbers for you or just take point presence and kill you, they can take your gun and then all of a sudden, the enemy has the overwhelming advantage. Now, if you understand this, you understand that giving up your life and your weapon is very, very important not to do. So what you do is if enemies are 5-stack rushing into you, yes, you can invest a slow, yes, you can invest a wall or whatever, but more importantly than anything, you should just back off and regroup with your team and play for retake. Yes, you can still challenge some angles that allow you to enter onto point, but the important thing is you don't give up your life, because if you play a retake as 5 people and the enemies still have their garbage tier weapons, you have a chance. But if you gave up your really powerful weapons to the enemy, all of a sudden, like I said, they have the advantage. That's how you counter 5-stack eco rush. You got to realize that it doesn't matter if they have the positioning, it doesn't matter if they have the point presence. If they just have worse guns than you and you are actually engaging them as a team in a fair team fight, y'all will win that every single time. So that's what you need to set up. And the last tip that I'll give you on that is some angles are incredibly difficult to challenge with bad weapons. Think of like a heaven angle, right? You're playing up heaven. If the enemy only have classic pistols, they are going to have a very hard time challenging you. So you need to understand when an angle is really easy to challenge. Like if you're playing a really close angle, like a close corner, that is not what you want to be doing with better weapons, because that's a lot easier to be challenged or traded off of. What you want to be doing instead is playing this angle that is very, very hard to challenge, and they can't even peek it, or else you get an overwhelming advantage against them. And that really isolates the areas or the places they can hold on the point, makes it a lot harder for them to play without making a mistake, and you'll probably be able to get a few pickoffs because of it. Now moving on to tip number 4, or strat number 4. This is cheese strats. I'm just gonna lump multiple strats in together in cheese strats, but basically it's the Sova Sinatra wall bang, and it's just getting shotgunned in the face with shorties. Now, with the first cheese strat, this is one that Sinatra on Sentinels really popularized, where he basically rocks a Ares or an Odin, and he destroys you on Ascent B defense or in Garage on Haven, regardless of wherever he plays. This can be very annoying to deal with, and you have to ask, what can I do about this? Well, there are some things that you can do, and there's some things that you probably shouldn't do. The first thing you shouldn't do is you shouldn't directly challenge someone who has a wallbang spot set up. If you try to do that, you're gonna die, you're gonna get a whole bunch of damage on you, and it's gonna be very difficult for you to challenge them back. Now, of course, if you see them wallbang, of course, you could send some like pot shots through there from a fair distance away. But in general, what you should really be doing is trying to route to a different area. The thing is, these weapons are much worse at retaking, just like the operator is. So instead of contesting them directly, you would rather force them into a situation where they're much worse in. Another thing is, later on in the game, enemies will actually give away their position with these guns. They're one of those guns that's really loud, they spray it really often. And if enemies really post up, give away their position, a really powerful lurk or flank can shut these people down. You want to put them in a disadvantaged spot, learn their position, and then this will be a lot less of a problem instead of you all rushing garage up against one of these, trying to trade out with this Odin or whatever, and then all of you die. That can happen. It's happened in pro play. It could definitely happen to you in your ranked games as more people pick up this strategy. Now, the next thing is just getting shotgunned, and this is really annoying when you know the enemy's on a save round or whatever, and all of a sudden, no matter where you go, there's like a shorty person hiding in every corner, just waiting to trade out with you. What you should be doing in these scenarios when you know the enemies are saving, you need to be putting extra effort into clearing every single angle you possibly can. Clear every angle with utility, every single one of them. And the reason you do this is because if you do this, you won't be able to get skamazed by one of these shorties, and you have the pound for pound better weaponry. You don't want to set yourself up in a scenario where you even have the possibility of getting shortied. So that's really what you play off of. Even pros will try out this strategy, but really good pro players, they will really focus on making sure that any close angle they have to clear, they will flush it out with utility. They'll play a far angle, wait for the punish as the enemy shorty player swings out. That is an easy way to build up that advantage. That is an easy way to ensure that you never lose to these cheese weapons, because that's what it is at its core. It's a cheese strat. It's not a legitimate strat that's going to work every single time. Make sure that you do this, and for personal reference, in my opinion, the best thing that you should do is imagine the map is like a scratch off, right? Every angle you clear, you scratch that through, and that's crystal clear. But all the other areas are like surrounded in gray. I would say that like black areas in your mind would be like areas that you do not know anything about them at all. And then gray areas would be areas where you think enemies could possibly be in. Even if you don't want to directly challenge an angle, you can still set up enemies that are hiding in those angles for really disadvantaged team fight, as long as you don't forget later on that those angles haven't been completely cleared, because that can happen a lot where a team fight will ramp up and people will be coming here and there behind you, whatever, and you will forget that you actually never cleared that angle, and you walk up to that angle and you die. So as long as you keep that in mind, kind of keep a visual picture of the map, slowly start to eradicate things like the gray and black spots until they're clear in your mind, then you will never fall victim to a shorty ever again. Now, the last strat that we gotta talk about, and this one happens, some pros actually have this style as an entire team, but this could be really frustrating in your games. This is the perma rotators. And I'm sure you played these on either attack or defense. When you're on attack, the second you make a single bullet, the entire team rotate there, and then all of a sudden you're fighting up against 5 people and you're like, what in the world? Why are they all here? Or you're on defense and enemies look like they're going one way and they go the next way and they go the next way. They keep rotating over and over and over again. Well, there are ways to punish both of these styles. The first way to punish the style where enemies are on defense and they rotate to you far too quickly, you can push up to one place, leave someone baiting behind that is going to create pressure. You could even accomplish this even more so if you invest something like smokes or brimstone smokes or anything like that, because then the enemies either think that you're committing, or it's likely that you're committing because they see the smokes and the fire, but realistically you're only leaving one person behind plus investing a few abilities. That could be a way that you really bait them out because all 5 of them rotate, but then you're planting on the other side of the map. That can be fantastic, and this is a really common pro strat. The next thing that you could do on defense, if the enemies are just rotating, what you can do is sandbag a lot. What you want to do is you play more reserved, you anchor more, you don't rotate right away. If enemies indeed do commit, you can back off and play for the retake or play for some trades in a really powerful angle. What you should not do, however, is just rotate, because then you're going to get caught out by the enemy. Another thing that you could do that's really powerful is actually punish them for wasting so much time on the clock, because you got to remember, if enemies are just rotating again and again, they're actually wasting time, and that is really important. If you are sandbagging a really powerful stalling ability, when the enemies finally commit to a site and you can stall them for even more time, that just puts so much pressure on them. There was an example that I saw with the TSM versus Sentinels on Haven, where TSM rotated, and they finally committed to the C site after baiting out all this utility and all this time when there was only like 20 seconds left. But then a perfect Zombs Molly made them wait another like 10 seconds, and then when they came onto point, they just had no time. They were rushing to plant. One of them would plant and die, and then the other one would grab it, try to plant, and he would die. It was just a nightmare for them, and that is how they really punish this like constantly rotating offensive style. But there's a lot of ways to do it. This is just one way. But if you have any questions about any of these predominant meta strategies, definitely let me know in the comments down below. And if you want to level up your game and just dominate the meta right now, you want to dominate, you want to rank up, you want to climb all the way to Immortal, Radiant, or whatever, definitely go check out GameLeap.com. We got brand new in-depth VODs, guides, character courses designed from top to bottom, take you step by step from beginner all the way to a dominant tier player. Do yourself a favor and go check it out in the links down below. Thank you so much for coming by. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time.